Manatees are mammals. Manatees have small brains but are highly intelligent. Manatees also travel at a relaxing speed.
George, you're live, by the way.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, you guys might have caught me, rehearsing facts or looking up on manatees. I'm just so excited for this event. But welcome. Today's Flip event. I'm your host, George. I'm on Team Flip, and I am so excited for today's adventure. As you might know, November is Manatee Awareness Month, and today our special guest, Jason from the Mote Marine Laboratory, is going to teach us all about manatees. Jason, over to you.
Thank you so much, George. Welcome to Mote Marine Laboratory and Aquarium, where I'm coming to you live from up above our manatee habitat here at Mote. In fact, let me go ahead and flip my camera around, pardon the pun, and you can actually see there are Hugh and Buffett, our resident West Indian manatees, joining us for the program today. But let's go ahead and show you on the map exactly where I'm speaking to you from. And there you can see that we are located here on the west coast of Florida, just a little bit south of Tampa Bay, on the Gulf of Mexico, which is the natural habitat of manatees. And this is a really neat place, Mote Marine Laboratory and Aquarium. We're open 365 days of the year. So if you ever get a chance to come down and visit us here in Florida, maybe you could stop by and actually see Hugh and Buffett in person. And Mote is a special place. We were actually founded all the way back in the 1950s by this really remarkable scientist named Dr. Eugenie Clark. She founded our laboratory on shark research and became so famous for it that she became known as the Shark Lady. And we have since expanded to 20 other research programs, including research on manatees. We study manatees not only here in our habitat under human care, but we also study manatees out in nature. So we have a pretty extensive research program throughout the state, learning more about these incredible creatures. And in order for us to know a little bit more about Hugh and Buffett, I thought it'd be kind of interesting to do a little quick kind of biology lesson on manatee anatomy. So here we have our manatees swimming on in, and you can see that they do in fact have lots and lots of different body parts. They've got a paddle, back, ears, eyes, nose, snout, whiskers, mouth, nails, flipper, and belly. And what I would love to do is have maybe somebody from our audience pick apart, and there it is, the ears. We're going to learn first about the upper part of the manatee. Believe it or not, manatees can hear really, really well. They do have that kind of small ear opening on the side. They don't have big floppy ears like you and I do, kind of like a little pinprick on the side of their ear. And scientists can actually tell how old manatees live to be by counting the number of rings on the bones, ear bones of a manatee. And we have discovered that manatees can live a pretty long time, just like their cousins and on land. They can live up to 60 years or more, believe it or not. So these are really long-lived animals. Let's continue around and find another piece of a manatee to learn about. What's another body part we want to know about? Let's go ahead and choose which one. Anybody have a preference? Since we're up close to the ears, let's look at the eyes. Are the eyes coming up for us to see? Let's take a look at the manatee peepers. Now, believe it or not, manatees' eyes are designed for their lifestyle of living in muddy, kind of turbid waters. And so they really don't have the best vision in the world, but they can see. And then instead of blinking up and down like you and I do, they actually have a ring of muscle around their eyes that allows them to open and close their eyes instead of blinking. And they don't have any eyelashes or eyelids, but they do have lots of hairs around their entire body elsewhere. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. So let's head on back to our manatee to learn a little bit more about what makes these creatures so remarkable and so well adapted to their environment. Let's take a look at their snout or their nose. Continuing our trip around the manatee. Yeah, so they got a big old flexible schnoz on the front of the manatee. That schnoz allows them to have a very flexible front end, which allows the manatees to come along and actually scoop up their favorite food, which is lots and lots of floating vegetation. Here at Mote, we feed our manatees all day long, usually different kinds of romaine lettuce and kale, and that is what they use, that big flexible snout. And a lot of times when you're looking for manatees out in nature, it is just that little tiny nose that is poking up out of the water. You hardly ever see the entire manatee come out of the water. They don't do jumps and flips like dolphins do. Instead, usually you just see that little tiny nose poking up out of the water. And that's what makes them so difficult for boaters and other peoples to see when they're out there in nature. All right, let's continue on. Just a couple more things about manatees before we move on to another little bit about their biology. Let's go ahead and go back to that body part map. Let's talk about the flippers on the manatee. This is a pretty interesting part of a manatee, their flippers. If you were to take Hugh and Buffett, our resident West Indian manatees, and do an x-ray on them, you would actually see that they have bones inside the flippers of their front end. In fact, here I happen to have a model of what the inside of a manatee's flipper looks like. How many digits can you count right there? I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like the number of digits in your hand. So go ahead and do me a favor and put your hand up and wiggle your fingers. You've got 5 digits in your hand. And believe it or not, even though a manatee has more of a flipper than a hand, they actually do have 5 digits inside of there, believe it or not. Pretty cool. And they use those flippers to kind of move around through the water. It helps them to steer as they're swimming around. And they can also use that to help pull themselves along the bottom. And believe it or not, they actually have nails. I don't have it on my little puppet here, but manatees have nails on the end of those flippers that they use to grab onto the bottom and pull themselves along. All right, we talked about how they move in the front. Let's go ahead and talk about how they move in the back. We're going to talk about their paddle next, I believe. Let's take a look at how they get swimming through the water with that paddle. And they can get moving pretty fast. Now, most of the time, manatees are just kind of chillaxing, just like Hugh and Buffett are doing right here. They're just kind of hanging out. They've just had a nice big lunch, and they're digesting. And that's what manatees do when they're not eating, is they just kind of hang out. But if a boat comes along or some kind of thing comes along to disturb them, they can really get swimming through the water. They can swim up to 15 miles per hour. But compare the shape of that manatee's tail to a dolphin. You can see that a manatee's tail is round and shaped like a paddle, hence the name. But compare that to a dolphin's tail fluke. Dolphins' tail flukes are crescent shaped, and that allows them to swim up to 30 miles or more, even faster than a manatee. Pretty cool. All right, so that's about all the time we have for the outside of a manatee, but let's talk a little bit about what goes on the inside of manatee. Let's talk about what they had for lunch. Let's talk about manatee diets. So here at Mote, we feed our manatees all day long, and Hugh and Buffett, they'll get up to 75 heads of lettuce or more, and sometimes up to 96 heads of lettuce. And that's what they eat out in the wild as well. They eat seagrass, seaweeds, all kinds of vegetation. They're the only marine mammal that is a true herbivore. And they need all of that plant matter in order to sustain that big mass. Manatees are absolutely huge. And so they need to eat tons and tons of plants in order to get all the calories that they need in order to eat, in order to survive. But even though these manatees are really big, believe it or not a lot of blubber on these characters, even though they seem kind of big and round and kind of shaped like a potato. In fact, they don't have blubber like a dolphin or a whale. Instead, most of that mass that you see there comes from their organs, their bones, and their muscles. And so they are absolutely enormous creatures. Again, getting up to about 10 feet long, about 1,500 pounds, which may give you a kind of a clue as to their closest living relative on land. I give you some other clues as well. They are big, they are gray, they have a flexible snout. So let's see how you do with this next quiz question, seeing if you can identify what is a manatee's closest living relative on land. Is it 1, the rhino, 2, the horse, 3, the dog, or 4, the elephant? Don't know if you want to chime in, George, but everybody else type into the chat. Let us know what your guess is based on those clues of being big, gray, flexible snout. What do you think? 1, 2,
Man,
3, or 4.
if I can guess, I want to say elephant.
Is it an elephant? Yes, indeed, it is the elephant, which you can kind of see the family resemblance, right? In fact, Ella, they're not only closely related to elephants, they're also related to a couple of other crazy land creatures like the aardvark and the hyrax. And so manatees, closest living relatives on land, have these big flexible snouts in the front, and they all have these hoof appendages with the nails on the front. Aardvarks use them, of course, for digging. Elephants have nails, and so do manatees. In fact, the nails on a manatee grow throughout their lifetime. In nature, they'll crawl along the bottom and the rocks to move around. But here at Mote, sometimes we actually have to give Hugh and Buffett a manicure, in order to keep their nails nice and trim. Yeah, so let's take a look at this next one. You can actually see how big these manatees get. They get larger than a human being, up to 10 feet long. If I were able to lay down next to our manatees here, they would actually be bigger than me. And so they go absolutely enormous. And they weigh almost as much as a small car, as I said, up to 1,500 pounds. Hugh and Buffett weigh in around 1,200 pounds. There have even been pregnant females out in the ocean that weigh up to 3,000 pounds or more. So absolutely fascinating. And not doing a whole lot right now, but one of the interesting things that our manatees do here at Mote Marine Laboratory is they go through a lot of different kinds of husbandry behaviors. We take care of them, make sure that their health and well-being is taken care of. But as we're doing that, we can actually teach the manatees to come up to various kinds of targets and other places in the habitat so that we can perform different kinds of maneuvers to take care of them. We've trained the manatees to come up and turn over so that we can take a urine sample if we need to, or a blood draw, just like when you go to the doctor. And while they're doing that, we've also been able to have them work with us to learn a lot about their sensory biology. We've been able to have Hugh and Buffett help us learn how well the manatees see, how well they hear, and also how well they feel with their skin and all the whiskers that are on the front of their face. And so what we've learned from Hugh and Buffett has helped our resource managers better protect them out in nature. And unfortunately, manatees do face a lot of threats out in nature. Do you all know what the biggest threat to human being, or do you know what the biggest threat to manatees are? Kind of gave it away there. Yeah, it is actually human beings. We are the biggest threat to manatees. And this is a great time of year to see manatees, which kind of gives you a little clue as to the answer for this next one. If you do want to come and visit Hugh and Buffett or manatees out in nature, when do you think is the best time of year to see them? Is it 1 in the spring, 2 in the summer, 3 in the fall, or 4 in the winter? What do you think, George? When would you come down here to Florida and guaranteed to see a manatee?
Oh man, since I live in Minneapolis, I hope it's D, winter.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Remember I said that they don't have a lot of blubber on them. In fact, most of the bulk of them comes from their organs and their muscle. And so they don't have a lot of insulation when it gets nice and cold here in the Gulf of Mexico. So what they do is they've learned that they can seek out warm water refuges around the state of Florida and our freshwater rivers and springs where it stays a constant temperature between 60 to 70 degrees. And so they usually go into these warm water refuges like you can see on our Bing maps and other places. You can actually see them from space if you zoom on in here at Crystal River and find manatees. And that's a great place to see them during the winter time. But they've also learned that the outflows from our power plants are a great place to go too. It's like a big old manatee hot tub or jacuzzi. And so there's a lot of interpretation centers around the power plants here in Florida where you can see not only dozens, but sometimes hundreds of manatees coming in to find that warm water refuge. So it's a great time to see manatees is during the winter. And if you want to switch over, this is kind of cool too. I don't know if you can switch over to my video. Our aquarium biologists have just started to come in and they're starting a feeding session here with our manatees. So that's pretty cool. And we'll see that in the background as we continue on. They're putting in different kinds of food in there that is their favorite food to eat. But as I was saying, unfortunately, manatees in our freshwater rivers and springs are facing lots and lots of threats. The biggest threat to them was human beings, and in particular, they are threatened by our motorboats. People love to use the recreational watercraft throughout the state, and that's great, but you need to keep an eye out for manatee slow-go zones. If you see those signs up along the waterways in Florida, slow down your boat, keep an eye out for that little fuzzy coconut of their nose poking up above the water. Most of the manatees in Florida have been struck by boats at one time or another. They're pretty tough and sometimes they do survive, but they're often left with a variety of different scar patterns on them. The other thing that's tragic is that their ribs and back are often injured by these boat strikes, and their lungs are found right at the surface of the back here. And so their lungs can be injured very dramatically by those boat strikes. So that's bad news for them. And we don't want to have that happen. So we're on the lookout for manatees. And here at Mote, we also have a rescue program where some of our stranding and rehab staff will go out and help rescue manatees when they are sick and injured. So that's a little look at manatees here in the state of Florida with our resident West Indian manatees, Hugh and Buffett. And as the feeding time continues here, I think we've got a couple of other activities planned, don't we, George?
Yeah, we do. Thank you so much, Jason. Like so much learning about manatees. Like I'm still trying to wrap my head around how much lettuce they eat. Like that is crazy. Like what is 73 heads of lettuce? That's a lot. That's a lot. But they're eating well. They're eating healthy. Well, Jason, as well, we have a ton of people tuning in from around the world, learners. Looks like we have India, New York, Egypt, Alaska, California, Texas. Oh, we have my Iowa City crew. What's up? And then shout out to Mr. Edwards' grade 5 class in Alberta, Canada. So many cool people. Also, everyone that's watching, if you do have a question, do drop that in the chat. We'll have an opportunity to hear from Jason to answer those questions that you have about manatees. But keep thinking about that because we're about to get to one of my favorite activities, which is this selfie time. So Jason, what we're going to do is allow our audience to kind of gather to the front of the screen, wherever they're at classroom, at home, wherever you're watching, and basically give them a chance to get set up. But until then, let's cue some music. All right, Jason, let's take some selfies. Will you count us down?
3, 2, 1.
I love it, Jason. Thank you so much. I'm having such a blast. Again, thank you for being here, Jason. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely.
I hope everyone out there is having a great time as much as I am. And we'd love to see those selfies we just took with Jason. So post them on social by tagging at Microsoft Flip and at Marine Lab. All right. With that, it's time for our question segments. You ready, Jason?
I am ready. Go ahead.
All right. First question is, are manatees an endangered species? And do manatees have to deal with predators other than humans? That's a great question.
That is a great question. One of the manatees' main defenses is they grow very big very quickly. They're born about 2 feet or more when they come out. And so they're already very large, and then they grow very quickly, almost to adult size in just a few years. And they hang out with their mothers for that early part, about 2 or 3 years when they're first born. And so they don't usually have many natural predators. Sharks don't bother them. Of course, they can move from freshwater to saltwater to get away from those. And we don't have alligators or crocodiles really bothering them at all either. So the biggest threat to them are human beings. And we're doing 2 things really that is affecting them. Of course, we have those speed boats, which affects manatees. Sometimes they also get trapped in the weirs and locks and water control structures that we have around the state, and that can be bad news for them. And then the other thing, sadly, is habitat loss. Manatees need to eat about a football field's worth of vegetation every single day. You multiply that times the 15 to 3,000 manatees that are in our state, and that's a lot of vegetation that they need. They help keep our waterways clear and recycle those nutrients, part of the life cycle and ecology of Florida. But unfortunately, they've lost a lot of their seagrass, especially on the East Coast through pollution and habitat destruction. And so unfortunately, a lot of those manatees are starving over there. And our resource managers are doing everything they can to try to help them, which is something that you can do too. You can go to mote.org and find out some more information about how you can help and do some more research on manatees, and tell a friend or family member a little bit about what you learned today, because maybe that will ultimately help the manatees too.
I love that, Jason, and that's so relevant to especially this month of November being Manatees Month, and like what we can do to really, help and support the manatees that live in that area, and making sure that they can live, long-lasting lives. Which is actually, a great lineup for the next question, which is how long do manatees live?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just like their relatives, the elephant, they are very long-lived. We know that in human care, manatees have lived more than 60 years. And then out in nature, they'll typically live 40 to 50 years, maybe longer. And scientists can tell how long manatees live by looking at their ear bones. If unfortunately a manatee does pass away, we can actually look inside that bone, cut it into circles, and actually look at the number of growth rings on that manatee. And we've learned that they can live at least 50 years or more, maybe longer. We actually don't know the maximum lifespan of a manatee, but we do know that they do live a long time if given the chance. Good question.
And that's wild. That's wild. That's awesome though. It's like I always think of like kind of a tree stump. How you look at the different rings, and the similar way with like a tooth, and how they can kind of use that same sort of metric. That's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question: what is a manatee's natural habitat like?
Yeah, so I don't know, we might be able to bring up some imagery of manatees out in nature that we had earlier, but they are found in places with marine or freshwater vegetation. Again, they're plant eaters, so they need seagrass beds, they need seaweed forests, any place that they can get a nice big mouthful of basically lettuce vegetation. That makes them very happy. So they're found in Florida freshwater rivers and streams. They have a cousin called the dugong, found in the Indo-Pacific, which is found in seagrass beds throughout Australia and Indonesia. And then there's another species found off the west coast of Africa that is also found in the lakes, rivers, and streams of Africa. And there's one species that's only found in the Amazon River. Of course, it's called the Amazonian manatee, and it also eats vegetation. And here you can
all
see
over.
some of our meal coming through. So eventually they'll come by and get that little piece of kale right there.
Very cool. Very cool. Man, I'm just trying to think. Like they're all over, like the Amazonian manatees as well. How long can manatees stay underwater?
That's a great question. Usually they'll rest for about stay under for about 5 minutes before they come back up. But sometimes they get a little bit sleepy and they can rest for even longer periods of times, even up to 15 minutes or so. And so they do have the ability to stay underwater for long periods of time. Nothing compared to, say, a reptile like a sea turtle, though. The sea turtles can stay underwater for hours at a time. Manatees are mammals, and so they have a little bit higher metabolism. So eventually they do have to come up for a nice breath of fresh air. But that's when they're most vulnerable, too. We see that little fuzzy coconut of a nose when they come up to breathe. And a lot of times that's the only thing that we'll see poking up out of the water. And it's hard for the boaters to see. So if they're going too fast through manatee zones, that's often when they get hit.
Right. That makes total sense. Which is also, so a question for you is like, why did you start rescuing manatees?
Yeah, so here at Mote, we help out with manatee rescue. We have a group called the Strandings Investigation Team. We don't have a hospital for manatees. We have a hospital for turtles, but we don't currently have one for manatees. What we do is we have Hugh and Buffett, and they were born in human care, and so the state has deemed them non-releasable. They really wouldn't know what to do if they were ever out in nature because they've never had an opportunity to experience that. But it does give us an opportunity to learn a lot about their basic biology. Again, with the manatees' cooperation, we can go through those little experiments where we learn about their vision, their hearing, and how well they feel, and learn a lot about the basic biology. And knowing that helps us to protect their cousins out in nature. And so our biologists will oftentimes go out into the field looking for manatees, knowing what they've learned from Hugh and Buffett. For example, did you know that manatees actually make sound? They make noise. That's one of what our scientist Beth Brady is studying. They make little chirps and squeaks and clicks. And that's brand new research that's just coming along with Dr. Brady's help. And we're able to put hydrophones into the habitat with Hugh and Buffett to learn a little bit more about the kinds of sounds they make. And then we can compare it to the sounds that the manatees make out in the waterways and compare the two. And so that is why Mote studies Hugh and Buffett, because it's a great opportunity to learn with the manatees' cooperation. They do everything voluntarily. We don't force them to do anything. They don't do tricks for us. Everything they do is with their own cooperation. And we learn about the basics of manatee biology with their help, and then apply that to protecting manatees out in nature. Because again, manatees out in the wild are threatened and endangered, and we need to protect them.
That's so fascinating. It's such exciting research being done, like groundbreaking for, how we can continue to support manatees and, make sure that they live long lives. Last question to kind of round it all off. why are they called manatees?
Yeah, why are they called manatees? I believe that is a native term and had to do a lot with the mammary glands because manatees are mammals. And so, believe it or not, they actually nurse their young with a little gland right underneath their arm. And so that is where the name ultimately derived from. And that's where we get the term manatee from. And I don't know where the term dugong came from. So maybe that's an opportunity for you to do some research out there in Flipland and see how the dugong got its name. But they're also sometimes called mermaids, right? The legend goes that the sailors a long time ago maybe were a little bit out on the sea for too long, and they must have thought that the manatees, without having any tail limbs, may have been the source for the legend of the mermaid. I'm not so sure, though.
That's awesome. That full circle. I love that. Thank you so much. All right. I know we're wrapping up our event today, but Jason, I'd love for you to share any final thoughts with everyone watching today.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways that you can help manatees, both out in nature and here at Mote. For example, if you'd like to help us here at Mote take care of Hugh and Buffett or their relatives out in nature, you can adopt an animal. Go to mote.org/adopt. All the proceeds that come from your adoption will help to benefit the animals at our laboratory and at our aquarium, and ultimately help animals out in nature. And you can adopt a manatee if you want, or you can virtually adopt an alligator or many of the other animals that we have at our aquarium, and learn more about that at mote.org/adopt. And I believe we have some flip topics too that we can talk about. Of course, you can always go to our Discovery library and find out more about the research that we do here at Mote, or any of the other fascinating topics that are available through Flip. It's really cool. In fact, there's the one, talking about manatee research right here. So that's a great one to check out. That's available in Mote's Discovery Library. Teachers and parents and groups, you can check that out and add that to your own library and learn a little bit more about manatee research here in Florida from Mote Marine Laboratory and Aquarium.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jason. We're learning so much. I can't imagine, all the work you're doing. I can't thank you enough. Again, especially in this month of November with, Manatee Awareness Month. Give our best to yourself, to Hugh, to Buffett. It's been so inspiring. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Well, that was amazing. And again, to reiterate, the learning and inspiration is never over. And what Jason said, you can head on over to aka.ms/manatees research to find today's topic so you and your learners can reflect on all that they learned today in today's live event. And we host Flip events every single week. On December 1st, we'll be celebrating 30 years of Magic Treehouse series with author Mary Pope Osborne and Random House children's books. And then on December 8th, we'll be celebrating Computer Science Education Week with our friends on the Minecraft team. So head on over to aka.ms/Flip events to register for your next adventure today. And before wrapping up, I have a question for you. Do you have any hobbies or skills or something that your kids want to hone, or yourself? If you answered yes, I want to invite you to explore some of the incredible live online lessons offered by Microsoft's Take Lessons. All right, that's it for today. I'm your host, George. On behalf of Flip, Mote Marine Laboratory, our amazing guests, Jason and Hugh and Buffett, thank you for spending time with us, and we'll see you next time.